really didn't know where to put this. It's a video done by Special Snowflake and trans trender Riley Dennis, and he's talking about Islam, the religion of violence. Ultimately, I felt it had to go under the social justice whiners label, because it's his SJW stupidity that makes him say these ridiculous things. So let's see why Riley supports Islam, and why, as usual, he's absolutely wrong.
I get a lot of comments across various social media platforms that go something like this. Why do you defend Muslims? They would kill you for being transgender. Try going to Saudi Arabia. They would stone you for being gay. You're defending people who would use Sharia law to murder you. If Muslims are so great, why don't you move to the Middle East? Oh right, because they'd behead you.
And all of those comments are factually accurate. Most places in the Middle East, those places that do follow fundamentalist Islam and enshrine Sharia law, would kill, or at the very least severely punish, legitimate gay people and legitimate trans people. Now why do I put it that way? Because Riley here is a trans trender. He's not really transsexual, nor do I think he's really gay. He's just playing the SJW game. I mean, it isn't like he's had any kind of operation to render him female, and he only wants to sleep with women. Although I find it hard to think, based on other videos, that anybody in their right mind would sleep with him. So he's a biological male that wants to sleep with women. That makes him a straight hetero dude that's had his head polluted by liberalism.
These comments are frustrating because, for one, they show a deep misunderstanding of Islam, but also they try to use queer people as an excuse to discriminate against Muslims.
You don't need any excuses to dislike fundamentalist Muslims. The people that we're pointing out here are theistic, murderous animals. Their own actions justify the hatred.
And I am not here for that. I'm a queer, trans, gay person, and I will happily support and defend all of my Muslim siblings.
Do you actually have Muslim siblings? I mean, seriously, biological brothers and sisters that are Muslim? Or are you just parroting the regressive party line? I vote for the latter.
I refuse to be used as an excuse for people to discriminate against Muslims.
Well, since you're not a trans, gay, or any kind of Oppression Olympics representative, don't worry. You're just a cis white male who desperately wants to be oppressed.
Why do people believe this? Why do people think that all Muslims hate queer people?
There's that qualifier. All Muslims. Because nobody ever says that all Muslims hate queer people. But demonstrably, lots of Muslims do. See, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There isn't a single religion out there where every single adherent believes the exact same thing as every other adherent. It simply doesn't happen. There are as many different views as there are different believers. But just because not every Muslim believes that killing or otherwise harming gays is a good thing, doesn't mean that there aren't an alarming number of Muslims out there that do.
I would argue that it's because that's the only way they're portrayed in our media. Muslims are never main characters and they're rarely protagonists. If you see a Muslim in a TV show or a movie, they're probably a terrorist. And if you don't know any Muslims in your everyday life, you probably only hear about them when there's a terrorist attack. But
if by media you mean the liberal news, then maybe, because Muslims demonstrably do engage in violence worldwide. There's no denying that. But the reality is that Riley here lives in a nice, comfortable Western democracy where such things are, by and large, not allowed to happen, and because he doesn't see the horrors that religious extremists can bring upon society, he figures it just doesn't actually exist. But damn, he'd like it to, because he wants to open the floodgates of radical Islamic immigration, so we have the same kind of rape epidemic that Europe has going on right now.
There are 1.6 billion Muslims in this world. That's a lot of people, way too many for them to all share the exact same beliefs and principles.
There are probably 1.6 billion different views of Islam, because nobody has the same views as anyone else. But again, he's just trying to collectivize them all, as though just because not every Muslim is a violent fanatic, that no Muslims are violent fanatics. And that's not what reality shows.
For instance, just like there are different denominations of Christianity, there are various sects of Islam. The main ones are Sunni and Shia, but even within those, there are tons of further divisions. Thinking of Islam as a monolith would be like saying that all Catholics, Protestants, Lutherans, Baptists, and Episcopalians believe the same thing, but that would be ridiculous.
Nobody thinks of Islam as a monolith. But even within Shia and Sunni Islam, violence still reigns. In fact, most of the Muslim-on-Muslim violence in the Middle East is sectarian. There's a war between the Shia and Sunni sects that will probably never end because they ultimately follow fundamentally different paths in their beliefs. And in general terms, all Christians do believe the same things because they all follow the same book. And that's the case with Muslims too. They only differ in the details.
Plus, even though people generally associate Muslims with the Middle East, the majority of them, about 62%, live in the Asia-Pacific region.
Now I'm going to stop you right there for a moment. Yes, it is true, most Muslims live outside of the Middle East. That doesn't change what goes on in the Middle East in the name of Islam. This is what happens when you lack the moderating effects of a secular society. Much of the Middle East is officially Muslim. The governments there are near theocracies, and Sharia law rules the roost. And that's why we see most of the violence in the Middle East, where Islam is allowed to fester.
Indonesia is the country with the largest Muslim population, but when people try to talk about what all Muslims believe, they usually reference the laws of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, or Afghanistan.
That's because the laws of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan come straight from Islam, you cross-dressing boob. So I'm going to stop here and explain some reality to you. I know you won't like it, but tough shit. The Western world has moderated religious insanity by effectively neutering it with secularism. The religious in the West are not allowed to act on their religious impulses because secular society has made it unacceptable and illegal to actually do the things that most religious books tell their adherents to do. And that's a good thing. But in the Middle East, we see what happens when religion, Islam in particular, gets to practice what it actually preaches. This is what Islam is, not the sanitized nonsense that gets practiced in the West. What you see in most places in America and Europe isn't Islam, it's Muslim light. The same is true of Christianity. What you see in the West is Christianity with a muzzle. If you want to see true Christianity, go look somewhere like Uganda, where fundamentalist Christians push the death penalty for gays. That's what these religions are. Deal with it!
The fact is, oppressive governments can use any excuse to impose their will.
Especially when these governments are run by the rules of religion. Whereas the government of the United States is constitutionally secular, places like Saudi Arabia, according to their very own documents, describe them as a sovereign Arab Islamic state with Islam as its religion. I have no idea why you people don't get this.
In Saudi Arabia, for instance, you can be jailed, tortured, or even executed for being gay or transgender. That doesn't mean that this is a Muslim law that all Muslims support. It's a horrible law, but it's a law put in place by the Saudi Arabian government, not the religion of Islam.
Yes, you can, because that's what Islam actually teaches. What you're doing is taking Islam light, Islam that's been neutered by secular society, and pretending that's what Islam actually is. And you're wrong. That's Islam declawed by rational people.
It'd be kind of like if we had no separation of church and state and the Westboro Baptist Church was in charge. Do you think they'd be very kind to gay people? Of course not, but that wouldn't represent all Christians across the globe.
Honestly, the Westboro Baptist Church operates pretty much like the Christians in Uganda do. Or at least they would if they could legally get away with it. You don't think that the Phelps clan wouldn't be out killing gays in the name of God if they could? Hell yes they would, but they don't get to act on their beliefs because they have a secular government stopping them. But if that secular government went away, if the government became a theocracy, like a lot of fundamentalist and evangelical Christians want it to, Christians would be out murdering gays in a couple of generations because that's what Christianity is at its most raw. Geez, Riley, you can't be this dumb. It's like saying that flag football is the way football really is, when in fact, tackle football is how football is, and flag football is just a wimpy version designed to keep people from getting hurt.
That's because Saudi Arabia's laws are largely based on Wahhabism, which is a specific sect of Islam, just like the Westboro Baptist Church's version of baptism is a sect of Christianity.
Yeah, but you admit that Saudi Arabia is governed by Islam, whereas the government that the Westboro idiots live under is not governed by Christianity. Are you dense?
And just like most Christians disagree with the Westboro Baptist Church, most Muslims disagree with Wahhabism.
That's because most Christians, at least most Western Christians, grew up in a secular society where those beliefs have not been acceptable. Therefore, they have, just like most Western Muslims, rationalized their ways around the things in their holy books that secular society finds abhorrent. But that doesn't stop these things from being in their holy books. That's the actual religion. You're celebrating the fact that they're doing their religion wrong. I think it's a good thing that they're doing it, because life would be horrible otherwise, but they're still doing it wrong.
And like with all things, it's complicated and nuanced and not one-sided.
No, it's really not that nuanced. Go read the Quran and the Hadiths. There it is in black and white.
In Iran, for instance, homosexuality is illegal and you can be executed for it. But since the 1980s, the Iranian government has partially funded sex change operations for transgender people. And since 2012, the government requires health insurance companies to fully cover the cost of those operations.
Riley, it isn't voluntary, you know? They force these operations on people who claim to be gay. If you lived in Iran, you wouldn't have a dick right now.
But as proof that anti-queer laws are straight from Islam, people love to point to Sharia law, which they tend to think is one list of rules set forth in the Quran that all Muslims follow. However, Sharia law is different depending on who you ask, and it draws from both the Quran and the Sunnah, which consists of a bunch of different texts.
That's not actually true. In fact, with very few exceptions, all scholars of Sharia interpret homosexuality as a punishable offense and a sin under Islamic beliefs. Now, of course, the penalty varies, again based on the amount of secular society surrounding the believer, but nobody doubts that the Quran and the Hadiths call for homosexuality to be punished, regardless of the sect of Islam. It isn't just Wahhabism, but Sunni Muslims hold the same views. I mean, according to Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who many consider Sunni's most influential living expert on Sharia, he says, Muslim jurists have held differing opinions concerning the punishments for this abominable practice. Should it be the same as the punishment for fornication, or should both the active and passive participants be put to death? While such punishments may seem cruel, they have been suggested to maintain the purity of the Islamic society and to keep it clean of perverted elements.
Because of this, different sects have different definitions of Sharia law. For some, it's praying 5 times a day and not drinking alcohol. But for others, it's stoning gay people to death.
Only the ones that exist in secular societies, and certainly not all of those. Now, you remember I talked about Uganda's Kill the Gays law. You know where they got that idea? Scott Lively, an American Christian and head of Abiding Truth Ministries. He helped them to draft the legislation and has been a tireless advocate of killing gays worldwide. That's why he's currently being sued by gay rights groups and is being accused of crimes against humanity. That's the problem. Even being part of a secular society, if you take your religion too seriously, you're apt to go rogue, as we see plenty of Muslims in the Western world who are being polluted by ISIS and other radical Islamic groups into committing atrocities. But yeah, Islam's that religion of peace, right?
There are several passages in the Quran that people use to justify that, but none of them explicitly say that you have to kill gay people. They're kind of vague and open to interpretation, especially depending on how you translate them. However, nothing is vague about homosexuality in the Christian Bible. Leviticus 18:22 says that it's an abomination, and Leviticus 20:13 says that if a man has sex with a man, you have to put him to death. That's pretty direct, and yet we're not saying that all Christians believe in Leviticus law and want to kill all the gay people they see. That's because there are many different interpretations of the Bible in Christianity, and many of them are peaceful and accepting of homosexuality. The same can be said for Islam.
Sure. And there are Christians out there who say they don't believe in God. So what? That doesn't prove that huge numbers of Muslims don't hate gay people and don't think they deserve to be killed.
There are plenty of Muslims who have no problem with gay people, and in fact, there are gay and queer Muslims. And just as some Christians believe that homosexuality is a sin, but you shouldn't be killed for it, the same is true for some Muslims. Islam is not anti-queer any more than Christianity is.
But Christianity is anti-queer, just like Islam is. You're really arguing that just because some people have found a way to rationalize their way around these teachings, that somehow the teachings magically go away. And they don't.
And look, if you're an atheist right now and you're sitting there thinking that all of these religions are horrible and we can't tolerate any of them, I want you to reconsider that. I'm an atheist myself, which means I'm not a huge fan of the Bible or the Quran, but I do recognize that there are many good Christians and many good Muslims.
There are many good people who are good people in spite of their religious beliefs, not because of them. That's really where your whole argument falls apart. I'm not saying that these people are bad. I'm saying that their beliefs are bad. Their religion is bad. All religions are bad. That some people manage to be decent human beings in spite of the mind poison that they keep in their heads isn't a good reason to believe the ridiculous things that these people believe. And as I've said many times before, your beliefs inform your actions. The number of people who have been convinced by their religion to go off and fight as an ISIS terrorist is mind-blowing. Why are you defending this?
In my experience, I found that your religion, or lack thereof, is a very bad indicator of how compassionate of a person you are.
I don't care how compassionate of a person you are. I care how rational of a person you are. And the religious are not rational. Period. At least when it comes to their religious beliefs. So again, I've got to ask, why the hell are you defending this?
I get messages every day telling me to kill myself and calling me all sorts of anti-trans and anti-queer garbage. The majority of these seem to come from online atheist communities, and I get a good amount of hate from Christians who think I'm going to hell.
Well, that's because you're a trans trender, and you ought to be insulted for it. There's a difference between people who are atheists telling the truth and delusional Christians threatening you with an imaginary punishment.
But most of the time I hear from Muslims, it's a message of support and acceptance. So why do I support Muslims? Because I can recognize that the laws of a few Middle Eastern countries do not represent the views of all 1.6 billion Muslims.
No, but the contents of their holy books do, and the contents of their holy books are reprehensible. But you're really just a fan of people who found a reason to ignore huge swaths of their religion in favor of secular Western values. Now, given a choice between crazed radical Islamic terrorists and barely religious secular Westerners, I know which one I'd pick. But I'd rather they just give up their idiotic religious beliefs entirely and just be decent people without imaginary friends.
Because I know that being a Muslim doesn't automatically mean being against queer people. Because there are queer Muslims and trans Muslims and gay Muslims. And because Muslims face a huge amount of discrimination in the US and Western Europe because of the actions of a militant group in the Middle East that they have nothing to do with.
Except when they get converted to radical thinking and go off to strap on a bomb vest and die in the name of their imaginary friend, of course.
When we're fighting for social justice, I think it's important to not leave Muslims behind.
Well, social justice is idiotic, just like Islam, and Christianity, and all religions. You've all been left behind by reality. Rent a clue.
Hate crimes against Muslims are a real problem. It's now a pretty regular occurrence for mosques to be burnt down, and on January 29th, a white nationalist shot and killed 6 Muslims at a mosque in Quebec and injured 19 others.
And that's horrible, and I certainly don't support anyone doing that. But there were 164 incidents of Muslim violence in January of this year alone, resulting in hundreds of deaths and injuries to innocent people. So which is more dangerous? One guy who is absolutely in the wrong and killed a couple of Muslims, or some Muslim extremist who on New Year's Eve shot up a nightclub in Istanbul and killed 39 people and injured another 70. And that's just one attack. Why are you defending these monsters?
Anti-Muslim violence is real, and our feminism has to recognize that.
Islam has nothing at all to do with feminism. Sorry, I just had to point that out.
I try to make sure that my feminism is as intersectional as possible because people can have a lot of different marginalized identities, and that means supporting Muslim rights as well.
Intersectional feminism is stupid. But then again, you're just trying to stick all of your chickens under the same umbrella because you don't want to confuse yourself or others. But I'm sorry to break it to you, Riley, but goddamn are you confused.
It's important to remember that intersectional feminism means fighting for the rights of all people, not just whatever group you belong to. It's like that one saying, nobody is free while others are oppressed.
Yeah, and it's back to the oppression Olympics once again. But you're treating Muslims like they're some grand collective, where I'm treating them like individuals. You're treating them like a religion, and I'm treating them like people. You're failing to recognize that the religion they follow expressly teaches violence. You're ignoring the fact that huge swaths of them are simply ignoring major parts of their theology. Yeah, that's a good thing, but that's not what Islam is. That's Islam light, and while it's certainly preferable to radical Islam, what's even more preferable is these people stop believing idiotic things. And that goes for you too, Riley. But I think you're beyond hope.